Traditional Sweet Recipes from Malta Volume 2, soon available at www.traditionalmaltesweets.com. Traditional Sweet Recipes, creating a small slice of Malta that feels like home.
Jiena Marlene Scicluna nagħtikom merħba l-episodju ieħor ta' Maltese DownUnder, programm bi produzzjoni kollha kemm mill-belt ta' Melbourne. Il-programm tal-lum ser joħodna fis-skola ta' Sfin f'Melton u imbagħad lura fil-belt ta' Melbourne biex niltaqgħu mal-President tal-Għaqda Storika Maltija. L-ewwel mistieden fil-programm tal-lum huwa Andrew Micallef, choreographer u żeffien professjonali. Here we are at Galactic Dance Studios with Andrew Micallef. Now, Andrew has had quite a history within the Maltese community because Andrew's father is actually George Micallef, who has been involved in stage productions in the Maltese community as well as the young Maltese Australian dancers. So was it this influence that brought on the love of dance?
It was part of it. I started dancing when I was 6 years of age. And yeah, we started the Maltese Australian Dancers when I was 12 all the way through to about 14. And yeah, so it was a massive part that influenced me to keep going with what I was doing. Yeah.
You also had some stage productions?
Yes, with the Malta Star of the Sea, which was directed by George Cheney at the time. And again, I was born into it. So yeah, something that we started when I was pretty much born. Dad was always on stage and always watching him do that as well. Which is a massive influence on me wanting to get into the entertainment industry. Yeah,
despite being so young, Andrew, you're still so young, but you've had a long career in dance. If you go back to these, how many years?
It's been 30 years now.
30 years, or maybe you're not that young.
Dance, no.
Going back to looking back at these 30 years, highlights of your career so far.
Yep. So the biggest thing I have done was Moulin Rouge, the movie, directed by Baz Luhrmann.
And what was your part in that?
I was one of the dancers on there. There were a funny story actually. I was one of would have been 3 Melbourne dancers that got selected out of about 5,000. Wow. And we were, so flew over to Sydney when I was 18. The rehearsals was my very first day, I was 18 years old. And flew over there with Dad.
That would have been overwhelming, wouldn't it?
It was very, very, very overwhelming. So I was living on Oxford Street, pretty much going from living with Mum and Dad to all of a sudden living
independent
in Oxford Street and going to Fox Studios when it first opened up. It was amazing. So I got to work with Nicole Kidman and Baz Luhrmann and Ewan McGregor.
Starstruck much or?
Well, I was actually starstruck by Caroline O'Connor more than anyone when I got on set because she was she's just an absolute amazing at what she does. Saw her in Chicago and saw her in all these musicals, so it was a lot easier to relate, and she'd achieved everything that I wanted to achieve. That was amazing.
So Moulin Rouge is definitely a highlight.
Yes.
Anything else?
Then I moved on to working with Judith Lucy on one of her shows. It was Colour Me Judith, where we toured around to Adelaide and Sydney and Brisbane.
Festivals?
Festivals, Adelaide Festival, the Melbourne Comedy Festival. Right. Over to Brisbane, where we did a 3-week stint there. Sydney, where we did another month there. Just lots of touring, travelling around. And then I was an acrobat on the Shakespeare Company's Midsummer Night's Dream. Wow. So one of the acrobats on that. And then I've done a few stints with Opera Australia and so acrobatics on that as well as dance.
Quite a full portfolio.
Yeah. Look, I fulfilled everything I wanted to as a performer. From live shows to movies to film clips to and then I just found teaching became a lot more fulfilling for me. So
mentioning teaching, I know that the first sort of teaching experience that you had was with underprivileged children. So tell us more about that. How did that come about?
Another big mentor of mine was Tony Bartuccio in the 90s, and at the time I was this 16-year-old who was just up and about and full of confidence as far as performing and dancing goes, and never had that hands-on experience with teaching. And this contract came up it was a 6-week program where I was set the challenge of getting some children. At the time I didn't realise they were underprivileged. I was just told to go in and put together a group for the St Kilda Festival. And I had 6 weeks to get a 2-minute routine put together. And as I'm going through, I was just teaching, and it came up all these little bits of challenges here and there with kids misbehaving and I wasn't understanding why. And then finally I sat down with Tony and wondering what was going on. I'm like, this is really challenging. He's like, yeah, you're working with underprivileged kids, people that have come back from backgrounds of orphans and
definitely not happy backgrounds.
No, not happy backgrounds. Yeah. And so it was one of the most enlightening experiences, because once those kids actually got onto the stage and they had this passion up there, it was just still something that sits with me, and still strive to get that feeling of fulfillment, I guess. Yeah.
And was that sort of what prompted you to consider opening this school?
Essentially. Yeah. At the time, I still had a full career. I had the offer to go over to Hervey Bay and open a school there. I also had another offer to be in Northcote to open a school there. And I was teaching here in Melbourne at the time. And I loved how humble and how raw Melton was. And so, I just chose to be out in the West, essentially. At that time, there weren't many schools. We were talking 15 years ago. And there were probably about 5 schools in the whole of the western suburbs, essentially, that I knew of anyway. I thought that I could bring in the inner suburbs, the inner city. Back then, hip hop wasn't really a thing. Contemporary was something that you did in mainstream. It was never out this far in the West, especially. So I was at the forefront of bringing all that to the suburbs, basically.
Tell us more about the school, students and choreographers and dance styles.
Yeah, so at our studio here, I was trying to strive to get all of our inner city styles out here. So we've got hip hop here with Dion Nuku and myself. And then we bring in guest choreographers on a regular basis.
Merħba lura fil-programm Maltese DownUnder u nkomplu nitkellmu mal-koreografu u żeffien professjonali Andrew Micallef. What about the male sort of dancers in the industry, where we're so used to seeing female dancers more than male? What would you say about that?
So growing up as a male dancer it wasn't easy, especially through the 80s and 90s. It wasn't something that was done quite often. Growing up, I was the only male dancer in my class until I was about 16. Where then I was joined by 3 other males. And so it was one of those things where I set out in the western suburbs especially to promote that male dancing or male dancers can be quite fashionable and quite cool. And it was only until my peers got older that they realised that, oh my God, I wish I started dancing. So it was always about football or basketball or those kind of sports.
Male.
It's just one of those things where I'm just trying to encourage that you can love what we do as dancers. I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but be a straight male dancer essentially.
Of course.
Which is
because they're so typecast. If you're gay, you're going to be into
performing arts. Essentially. And funny enough, even at this school, we've got 3 of us that are straight male dancers that all have partners and getting married and all that. We are quite unique in that sense. And it's catching on with all the
and it's
young
changed
males
now. It's changed so much.
Very much so, but past what I call the grassroots of dance or of this industry, it's become much bigger, so much more competitive, and almost glad that I'm not competing for those spots anymore, because there's some amazing talent in Australia now, especially with male dancers and even female dancers. It's just become so much more acrobatic and so much more competitive, essentially.
Yeah. Now, students nowadays, with a difference to when you first started, they've got more opportunities to showcase their talent, all over Melbourne and Australia, really.
Yeah.
What are particular challenges that you come up against when you're trying to make a name for yourself and your school in what's become such a competitive industry?
The biggest challenge is staying creative and not falling into, you're trying to be competitive in keeping up to date with the styles, but still trying to keep your originality and what's true to you, essentially. So I just find coming up with different ideas that will stand out, but not be too far out there that people don't understand what you're trying to do. That's the biggest challenge. The other one is keeping students humble and respectful, essentially. That's my biggest motto for me. Is to be respectful, be humble, because at the end of the day, without those characteristics, it's very hard to keep going in this industry. So I find my friends that have had longevity in this industry are very humble and very respectful.
Now, you still do also choreography outside of this school.
Yep.
What do you prefer? What do you like doing, choreography or dancing? What do you prefer?
For me,
what's more rewarding, maybe?
For me, it's the choreography and seeing my work still up on stage.
Of course,
and seeing like the finished products with it all lit properly and costuming and so for me, it's creation and in all facets of it. So I mix my own music, which is something that I do a lot of.
That's something I was going to ask. So when you're planning a choreography, what comes first?
Music.
Yeah.
So music is, again, growing up in a household, it's always full of music. So that was probably something that got me into dance as well. So back then, your Michael Jacksons and your Prince, and then Dad loves all his Black Sabbath, and that's kind of rock and roll. Sound, and then so being able to fuse all those influences together and create something that's quite unique, I believe.
And what about when it comes to movement during choreography? What inspires you?
So much. So I cover the genres of jazz, hip hop, contemporary acrobatics, and that's just me personally.
Wow, that's a lot.
So being able to see how the connection of all these different genres kind of fuse in together. And it helps me get a style that's quite unique, essentially. So it's all different genres essentially coming together. So for example, hip hop has quite a unique patterning work. And so being able to use that kind of pattern work into a jazz style of dance is quite fun. So that inspires me a lot. And even like now, just YouTubing and Facebook and watching other American dancers.
What about when you're seeing someone else's production and you're sitting there as a choreographer in the audience?
Yeah.
Do you find that hard?
Yes,
would you
extremely.
be thinking, I would have done this differently?
I just remember graduating from Bartuccio's full-time, and on probably our last day of rehearsals, Tony's turned around to us and said, "You'll never be able to watch a production the same way ever again." And it was so true. It was only the other day I went to Wizard of Oz, for example, and discussing with my partner about what I would have done better. Professional production is it's a little bit. It's a funny conversation to have, but always on the lookout. And in the same token, I would give credit to what they've done well,
of
essentially.
Course.
So it's not always just looking at what I could do better, but taking in what they've done really well. And this day and age, I'm loving how technology is getting really incorporated in the arts, as far as using screens and video footage and lighting, especially.
Yeah, definitely. What would be your advice to any of our viewers watching this interview who are actually thinking of maybe starting out in this industry?
I find persistence would be the biggest, the thing that you can, persistence and patience, essentially. So the longer you're in it, the longer you push on, the easier it becomes, the more doors that open up for you. Just give it your best, essentially. Yeah.
So tell me this, when you're on a dance floor, do dancers have to clear the dance floor when you're actually hitting the dance floor? Oh, here comes Andrew Micallef.
Yeah, not anymore. No, definitely not anymore. It's one of those things now that I do this 6 days a week, essentially. So when I'm out and about, I prefer to sit back and analyse. Yeah.
Maltese DownUnder thanks the Malta Tourism Authority, Mayfield's Business Advisors, MPD Steak Kitchen, Maltese Pastizzi Bar and Restaurant, First National Balkan Associates, Maltese Original Pastizzi Company, Smartline, and our bronze sponsors.